Drifting through space, an infinite watchful void holding mysteries that may never reveal themselves, where distances swell beyond comprehension and stars flicker like ancient memories from epochs too distant to grasp. Ellen Louise Ripley was a warrant officer with Weyland-Yutani's freight operations, stationed on board the US CSS Nostromo during its 2-year and 10-month round trip from Earth to Thetis, travelling at 43 times the speed of light. Following standard company directives requiring the investigation of any unknown signal of possible intelligent origin, the Nostromo was fatefully stopped short of its return trip, placing them in the significantly pivotal star system of Zeta II Reticuli, 39 light-years from Earth. The events that followed the profound discovery located on an unsurveyed moon named Acheron, later known as LV-426, were the very reason for Ripley's sabotage of the hauling vessel Nostromo and its precious cargo of 20 million tons of mineral ore, obtained on Thetis. In Ripley's final moments of uncertainty, survival must have felt like a fleeting mirage in the cold grip of space, and as a solitary figure caught between the jaws of terror and the quiet, uncaring infinity around her, there remains no doubt that her actions to detonate expensive quantities of company equipment, and in the process severing the only safe passage home, was done not only to preserve her own life, and that of Jonesy of course, but to ensure such a dangerous species would never make contact with humanity again. Therefore, after recording one last message on board the Narcissus in hopes for the network to discover it as she drifted out of United America's borders and towards the frontier regions, Ripley now entrusts her fate to the merciless hands of chance, surrendering herself to the enigmatic depths of Cryosleep, where her body's inevitable decay slows to a mere fraction of its pace in this delicate state. During this period, the Narcissus must have taken on an infamous allure when spoken of, her story lingering as both legend and cautionary tale as this ghost ship travelled towards the core systems at low faster-than-light speeds. However, what if her discovery 57 years later by a remote salvaging team was not the first contact? What if Weyland-Yutani had managed to locate her vessel in deep space and bring it back to Renaissance Station before the disastrous events unfolded in Alien Romulus, which took place 20 years after she escaped the Nostromo? We now know that the very same alien that once laid waste to the crew of the Nostromo, Xenomorph XX-121, was also retrieved and brought back to the station for research purposes. So why not the lifeboat shuttle that logically would be vastly easier to track in space? I'll analyse visual evidence to support this theory and dive deep into the reasoning behind such a claim. For the sake of argument, this theory makes much more sense if we allow the events of Alien Isolation to be canon. In fact, the story from that game was such a fantastic addition to Alien lore. Also, it helped realise the events surrounding the Nostromo and its crew in a way that benefited the overall narrative of Ripley's journey, and unveiled a deeper insight into off-world corporate oppression. Before I delve into the reasons concerning the Narcissus being tracked down and stored on the Renaissance, perhaps long before the specimen was located, it is of vital importance to explore the series of events and complexities that may have led to the capture of Ripley and then in turn the Xenomorph. It begins with the Nostromo's automated emergency ejection mechanism of its flight recorder or black box, in the extreme cases of diminishing ship integrity, where critical flight information could be at severe risk. It is plausible that this ejection might have occurred due to command authorization from Science Officer Ash in a last attempt effort to preserve vital data from the ship's logs, and, more importantly, his brief study of the deceased alien lifeform and its fascinating spawn that defied known biological plausibility. However, it would be more rational to assume the implementation of automated safeguards rather than the requirement of manual input when governing such expensive machinery. Suffice to say, it seems unlikely this would have been a concern for Ripley when hastily activating the self-destruct sequence, using the strange and mystical control panel whose keyboard presented many religious and cosmic connotations, to say the least. After the Nostromo detonates and Ripley finds herself safe and secure, she records her final message into the Narcissus flight recorder.
Lambert, Parker, Brett.
She also adds a personal message for her daughter, Amanda, who would later discover it on board the Anesidora as one of the few items salvageable from the corrupted Nostromo black box device.
and I hope you get to hear it one day. You see, I got into trouble. My ship, there was an accident.
When analysing the information presented on screen, it is highly evident that these recordings were uploaded from the Narcissus to the Nostromo black box, which would have drifted in close proximity to her vessel as part of an automated synchronization process. 15 years later, we arrive at 2137. In comes the US CSS Anesidora, helmed by Henry Marlowe and his crew, who suddenly pick up a distress beacon from the very flight recorder in question, still within the Zeta II Reticuli star system. After collecting, deciphering and following the flight data it contains in the hopes of finding and salvaging the legendary Narcissus itself, they instead become alerted to something far more ancient, mysterious and foreboding. Much like a siren's call, the same eerie and cryptic transmission, like a spectral voice drifting through the void that once doomed the crew of the Nostromo, now lures another victim. A long story short, they trace the signal to the derelict on Acheron, where one of the crew members becomes impregnated with an embryo. In a moment of crisis, they determine that Sevastopol Station was the nearest form of medical help for the infected crew member.
Sevastopol Station.
Once there, the crew uses the Nostromo flight recorder as leverage to gain entry onto the station, in hopes of treatment for Foster. Unbeknown to them and the station staff, Sevastopol was recently bought from Seegson by Weyland-Yutani, making the black box in their possession quite the prize indeed. On Sevastopol, the flight recorder would remain until Amanda Ripley arrived approximately 1 month later. Since her mother's disappearance, Amanda chose to become an engineer for Weyland-Yutani. This would allow her to explore the sector where her mother had vanished, albeit with a wavering hope of finding her, or at least some information detailing what had happened 15 years prior. So when news of the Nostromo's flight recorder reached Amanda, she wanted in on the mission, hoping to discover the truth about her mother. Upon finding the flight recorder in the archive section of facility control, the data, aside from the private message to Amanda I spoke of earlier, was suspiciously corrupted. If this was deliberate information suppression on behalf of Weyland-Yutani, then the station knew nothing about it, as in a message to Marshal Waits of Sevastopol, Chief Porter stated that after examining the flight recorder he found no data on it. There is also the possibility of damage inflicted on the black box due to prolonged exposure in space, but one might assume that such a device would be sufficiently shielded from these common hazards. Now that we're all up to scratch with the order of timeline occurrences, it's important to reiterate one crucial point for this theory to work. Ripley's shuttle would have been discovered before the alien cocoon was found in alien Romulus, hence why the company personnel, including Rook, knew that the creature was blasted out of the airlock in the first place. When the Nostromo black box containing its flight recorder was recovered, although most of the data was corrupted, perhaps some basic information detailing the flight path of the Narcissus could have been uncovered. This would place finding the Narcissus vessel of paramount importance, as the only other flight recorder in existence that could provide much needed information for Weyland-Yutani's Nostromo investigation would have been in that ship, and with a higher probability of its data securely intact. Moreover, the company's elementary knowledge of the outcome from the Nostromo crew orders to investigate an unknown or alien signal, what exactly was brought back on board, and the ensuing circumstances that led to the self-destruct sequence of the entire ship was either a complete mystery to Weyland-Yutani or possibly just limited to hastily compiled amounts of data pinged back from Ash, the Nostromo science officer. Therefore, the company's immense frustration over their own complete ignorance of this critical opportunity to make an important discovery, not to mention the embarrassment of losing a significant amount of money in the process.
42 million in adjusted dollars. That's minus payload, of course.
Well, after 57 years, the adjusted dollar amount should have had a couple more zeros attached, maybe. one might assume that there remained a palpable desperation among company executives to recover the modified Lockmark Starcob Light Intrasystem shuttlecraft named the Narcissus, model number 1809E1, in order to discover any scraps of information they could. Upon finding the shuttle, their priorities would be to meticulously analyse the ship's internals using specialised equipment and robotics, in hopes of finding trace samples of precious extraterrestrial lifeforms or pathogens for study. However, their top priority would indeed have been to gather precise coordinates of the planet's distress beacon location from the recorder. This company motive is perhaps one of the most crucial aspects of this theory, as it is essential to remember that before the crew of the Anesidora had departed from their chance visit to the derelict, aside from offering themselves as yet another host to this species, they had decided to deactivate the signal being broadcast, most likely realising it to be a warning. Now, although Weyland-Yutani would have obtained some rudimentary knowledge from Ash and Dallas's interactions with Mother regarding the Nostromo's prioritised investigation request on Acheron, their understanding of the matter may have just been limited to an unsurveyed moon of a gas giant, or simply just within the star system itself, Zeta II Reticuli. Hence, the sheer value of locating the Narcissus cannot be overstated at this moment in time. The year is now 2142, and a group of young explorers have made their way on board the Renaissance, orbiting LV-410. During their brief and unruly visit on the station in search of cryopods which would allow them to travel to Yvarga 3 safely, something interesting can be observed in the background on multiple occasions if you're quick enough. The iconic design instantly attracts, and the dimensions appear to match that of the Narcissus. Could this be a standard model highly manufactured and commonly used by the company as it expands its dominance in space? Maybe. But the presence of this Easter egg, if you will, demands my full attention, especially considering the timeline of events I just discussed, the otherwise miraculous needle in a haystack discovery of the cocoon, and the never-ending pursuit of knowledge and power the company continuously seeks. What the company might have gained from the repossession and archiving of the Narcissus and its contents is largely unknown, but several key incentives are clear. As previously discussed, the Nostromo's flight patterns and landing coordinates may have contained the secrets that were so desperately sought after since the Nostromo was first redirected in 2122. The elusive derelict site was an unprecedented, priceless discovery, a vault of alien technology and biological weaponry that could shift the balance of power and unlock secrets beyond human imagination. A prize almost within their grasp, but finding it would somewhat contradict future events in 2179, which introduced a 20-year-old developing colony located in a near-land region of the crash site on LV-426, strategically placed perhaps in hopes that somebody would eventually rediscover it and report back. Therefore, one proposed conclusion could be that Ripley, implementing a last defiant gesture of fuck you to the company, had pursued her vandalistic tendencies to the very end. She may have deleted or destroyed all other information that would benefit the company, leaving no trail behind while ensuring only her recorded messages remained on file. This brings us to the second reason for retrieval, Ripley herself. Having become the only remaining survivor of the Fetus cargo run, they may have required Ripley's insights, whether it be her first-hand observations of the xenomorph or information on any other crucial events that took place, either on the Nostromo or at the derelict site. I could think of a million questions that the top brass of Weyland would love to ask as a follow-up to the potential reports received by Science Officer Ash. At the foremost would be to describe the alien ship's design, any noticeable means of propulsion, its state of dilapidation, any discernible means of interaction such as a console, how many eggs or other signs of life were seen on board, and whether any notions or hints as to its origin were observed. The list continues. The fact that we see the Narcissus stored in a hangar and then automatically ejected during the ship's moment of impact into the ice ring implies that the company may have already considered her valuable enough to warrant preservation. If she was brought out of cryosleep and questioned, then presumably her memory of this incident was erased through the use of chemically induced formula via the cryosleep pod. With the lack of any conclusion to the Prometheus and Covenant narratives, which took place many years prior to Ripley's story, One must therefore presume that Ellen Ripley is the only living person with detailed first accounts of this remarkable species, making her anything but expendable at this moment in time. Speaking of Prometheus, are we to assume that the technology to observe somebody's dreams and memories in cryosleep is still available, as was demonstrated when David became curious about Elizabeth Shaw? Personally, I find this reversal of technology that becomes more advanced as time goes back a little lazy and uninspiring. Still, if this technology does exist, then it would suggest something more imperative to a more cohesive franchise overall, meaning Ripley need not awaken from her slumber upon capture, and therefore offering a more sensible and grounded reason for not remembering her brief detour to the Renaissance once she was revived in 2179. Subsequently, we could descend the rabbit hole even further and theorise that her conscious memories may have been intended to be used as AI training for synthetics. With the promise of the Renaissance facility one day housing these specimens for research and replication, they would require an android population that could handle xenomorphs. Ripley's experiences, downloaded and digitised, could develop training simulations or programming for synthetics, aiding in a more secure environment for human personnel. This brings us quite nicely to the urgency of Weyland-Yutani's final reason for obtaining the craft, and the company's inevitable next steps that would co-align with the dark episode of events in Alien Romulus. After finally possessing the Narcissus and its flight recorder, the station's personnel might have experienced feelings of disappointment at the lack of biological evidence of any alien ever being on board. It would have been unlikely that any trace amounts of excretion or secretion from the xenomorph left behind when it attempted to hide itself away in hibernation would be enough to provide sufficient DNA as the years passed. Therefore, judging by the grappling gun handle left lodged under the airlock door, as well as data on the Narcissus flight recorder, assuming there was any,
the lifeboat's flight recorder corroborates some elements of your account.
Their primary objective would now be to pinpoint the approximate location where the specimen was ejected and then begin the search. In parallel to additional research on the station, together with the ongoing hunt for a floating corpse in space, there may also have been an interest in furthering the science of cryosleep technology. Existing cryosleep capabilities had allowed Ripley to survive for years in stasis. Weyland-Yutani might have wanted to study and potentially enhance this technology for its high-stakes missions, where prolonged cryosleep would be necessary for lengthier voyages. It may be that nobody has ever slept in stasis for the amount of time that Ripley had endured, and the effects of this prolonged exposure could provide valuable data in the modification of better cryopod units for better journeys to better worlds. In the final moments of Alien Romulus, as the station collides with the Ring of Ice, we see a second craft escaping the collision, the craft. This could easily have been another automated feature initiated when the station's proximity alerts go into the red. However, I like to believe it was Rook who activated the shuttle launch just before his demise. He undoubtedly already had total control over the station's functionality using his clearance from that single console as we saw, but his motives did not appear as malevolent as his duplicate on board the Nostromo. Perhaps he figured she still had a part to play in aiding the company's agenda after all. So once more, Ripley and Jonesy are thrust out into the endless void, with the gun handle put conveniently back in place, of course, but this time with a new trajectory and one that would see her being discovered 37 years later, and taken to Gateway Station orbiting Earth, living happily ever after. Maybe. Ellen Ripley was a testament to resilience against the most primal terrors she was forced to confront. In a cosmos that harbours indifference and monstrosity, her journey becomes a haunting descent as she faces an enemy born of perfect design, relentless, calculating, a harbinger of death that knows no pity. Not only did she brave this apex alien horror, but she would also contend with the insidious ambitions of those who sought to exploit them. Entities that placed profit over lives. Ripley was a flame that flickered but refused to go out, a soul adrift in a hostile expanse, haunted and heroic. A symbol of unbreakable will in a universe that offers no mercy. This is Entertain the Dude, signing off.